Okay, in United States v. Comey, the false statements case against former FBI Director James Comey, there's been a third motion to dismiss filed. Now, in a previous episode, we already covered the motion to dismiss for selective and vindictive prosecution and the motion to dismiss for the unlawful appointment of Lindsay Halligan. This one, though, addresses some of the key and I think fundamental flaws in the indictment itself. And I've been pointing to those since the indictment very first came out. And I've been telling you that this thing is flawed from the get-go. Even if the courts later determined that Lindsay Halligan is lawfully appointed, which I don't think they will. And if they determine that this is not selective and vindictive prosecution and deny him that motion to dismiss, which I think is most likely, even though the motion to dismiss for selective and vindictive prosecution is a pretty hefty and compelling one. I think this motion to dismiss, just based on the indictment itself being flawed, is just a kill shot to the case. I've characterized the motion to dismiss for the unlawful appointment of Halligan as a built-in kill switch to the case, which I think is there on purpose. And this, though, is a kill shot, in my opinion. Now, it could be that when the United States files an opposition to this, I'm convinced the other way. We'll see. But for now, the count one in this case is obviously, as I've articulated a number of times, it doesn't make sense because there is no false statement in that Senate hearing from September 30th, 2020. What Cruz says in the hearing is in error. He misstates previous testimony, and he makes factual errors or creates a fictional narrative of things that McCabe is saying. His question is about McCabe, and yet person 3 in this indictment, who Comey is alleged to have authorized to be an anonymous source in news reports, we know is Daniel Richman. And that's why I've been going over all the possibilities. Early on in this case, I made several videos about this and who person 3 may be, because it being Daniel Richman did not make a lot of sense. Now, a false statement's charge against someone needs to be based on a question that is easily interpretable, easily understandable. It's a direct question. It's a clear question. And the answer that is being alleged is false, is a lie, has to actually be false in some way. And what we see in this what is articulated here in this indictment or motion to dismiss for the fundamental ambiguity of Cruz's questions and the literal truth is that what Comey said was literally true. And what Cruz asked is a compound and ambiguous question, a false statement charge that rests on a particular interpretation of a fundamentally ambiguous question must be dismissed. And whether a predicate question is fundamentally ambiguous is not a question for the jury. Rather, it's a question for the law, or it's a question of law for the court to resolve before trial. So the judge is going to have to deal with this motion to dismiss on this basis. If the court decides that the predicate question is fundamentally ambiguous, then the charge must be dismissed. Now, I have a long thread on this, and before we get into that thread, I want to tell you that this isn't for those of you who think Comey is a no good, very bad guy, of which there are many people on the right who think that, and there's also a lot of people on the left who think that, particularly Hillary Clinton, who to this day blames two things for her loss in 2016, James Comey and Russia. In the criminal case against former FBI Director Comey, this motion to dismiss highlights the flaws that I see in this case and why I think it's doomed. But just because I think this case is doomed or destined to be dismissed doesn't mean I think it's a wasted effort. I don't think that at all. So when you hear me articulate that the case is flawed, that there are all these problems with it, that I think Lindsay Halligan is probably not lawfully appointed and that's going to cause a dismissal because she didn't have the authority to bring it in the first place, as I go through this motion from the defense and I point out that, man, this makes a lot of sense. Those questions were ambiguous and Comey did tell the literal truth. I'm not telling you that Trump's DOJ, that Pam Bondi messed up. That's not my point. My point is that I think this case is about something else because it doesn't make a lot of sense that it's about this. Because this doesn't make sense. And not only is it flawed facially, it's not put together correctly. And so I think this case is destined for the bin, the trash can. But before it gets there, it's going to grab some other things on the way. And I think that's really what's going on here. I'm not going to bury the lead for you guys about what I think. What I think is that this case is not about getting James Comey. I think this case is about getting some attorney-client privilege material that was seized as part of the Arctic Haze investigation, one of the media leak investigations we got a couple hundred pages of declassified memos on this summer. And I think this case is about unsealing some materials that are now sealed by another court. So in a way, you could think of it as a legal crowbar that's going to open those things up. It's a vehicle for accomplishing those things, not a vehicle for putting James Comey in jail. Okay. In this motion to dismiss, based on fundamental ambiguity and the literal truth, this is what Comey's very good attorneys argue. The indictment conspicuously omits the lengthy, confusing questions that prompted Mr. Comey's testimony. Specifically, after speaking for more than a minute, Senator Ted Cruz asked Comey to recall statements he had made 3 years earlier and to simultaneously address statements that Senator Cruz incorrectly claimed were made by Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI. In doing so, Senator Cruz never indicated that he wanted Mr. Comey to address the statements or activities of any person except Mr. McCabe. Viewed in context, Senator Cruz's questions cannot form the basis for a violation of 1001A2, false statements, because they were fundamentally ambiguous and Comey's answers were literally true. Now, let's revisit that hearing. And by the way, this C-SPAN clip may mess up on me. Every other time I play this clip, it hangs on me. But it doesn't matter because you don't need to see Cruz as he says these things. You need to listen carefully to what he's saying.
Asset. All right, let's shift to another topic. On May 3rd, 2017, in this committee, Chairman Grassley asked you point blank, quote, "Have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?" You responded under oath, quote, "Never." He then asked you, quote, "Have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton administration?" You responded again under oath, "No." Now, as you know, Mr. McCabe, who works for you, has publicly and repeatedly stated that he leaked information to the Wall Street Journal and that you were directly aware of it and that you directly authorized it. Now, what Mr. McCabe is saying and what you testified to this committee cannot both be true. One or the other is false. Who's telling the truth?
I can only speak to my testimony. I stand by what the testimony you summarized that I gave in May of 2017.
So your testimony is you've never authorized anyone to leak. And Mr. McCabe, if he says contrary, is not telling the truth. Is that correct?
Again, I'm not going to characterize Andy's testimony, but mine is the same today.
All right, I'm going to make a final point because my time is...
Okay. Skipping past the questions for now. What is Comey's answer to these questions? His answer is, I stand by my previous testimony. That's literally true. He didn't revise his testimony. He didn't say, can I give you new testimony? Can I rephrase something I said? Can I clarify something I said? Can I disown that previous statement and give you an updated one? Nope. He was asked, who's telling the truth, you or McCabe? Instead of answering that directly and saying, me, Comey said, I stand by my previous testimony, which he did. Cruz then re-asked the question, and Comey says, I stand by my testimony. It's literally true. What Comey did in the hearing was true. He didn't seek to revise. He didn't seek to update, add a disclaimer, add clarification, nothing. He didn't make any changes at all. He stood by his testimony. How is that a false statement? The answer is it's not. Now, there's big problems with Cruz's questions here. Let's go back through them and I'll identify them.
On May 3rd, 2017, in this committee, Chairman Grassley asked you point blank, quote, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation? You responded under oath, quote, never. He then asked you, quote, have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton administration?
First error. Cruz misquotes what Grassley said in this hearing from May of 2017. Grassley asked about a Clinton investigation in both questions. Cruz makes a mistake and says Clinton administration. Now, we know, after familiarizing ourselves with this video from the original line of questioning, we know that what Cruz was saying was he meant to say the Clinton investigation, not administration. But this is a false statements charge, a federal crime. And the question needs to be clear and exact. It needs to be fundamentally sound. It can't contain an error like that, especially not absent any other context or information that would allow the person being questioned to interpret and understand the mistake that was made and give an appropriate answer. But Cruz leaves out the context of this, and more importantly, the indictment leaves out any context as to the line of questioning from Cruz. So that's the first mistake that Cruz makes. It's not a huge one, because to be fair, you could say, all right, yeah, but in the first one, he said investigation. So then you can, based on the preceding question, and since Comey was there in 2017, you know that he's asking, he didn't mean administration. It's just a verbal mistake that anybody could make. Totally understandable. But bringing an indictment based on that's a flaw. Now, we'll continue.
You responded again under oath, no. Now, as you know, Mr. McCabe, who works for you, has publicly and repeatedly stated that he leaked information to the Wall Street Journal and that you were directly aware of it and that you directly authorized it.
This is incorrect. One, it's not a thing that happened. As we've gone over in other videos, I.G. Horowitz investigated the leak, specifically this leak to the Wall Street Journal for this article, which had to do with two Clinton investigations, one of which was public, the mid-year exam, the investigation of the Clinton email server. But the second investigation was highly classified and wasn't supposed to be public at all. And that was the investigation to the Clinton Foundation, which involved like 3 different, if not 4, different offices in different districts, 4 different states, was informed by the Gilbert Chowdhury investigation, the guy who gave millions of dollars to the Clintons, Lebanese billionaire. And that thing was probably more of a threat to the Clinton criminal syndicate than the email investigation was, for a variety of reasons, which we can get into on another episode. But that one was the real threat to her, I believe, not the email one. And McCabe interfered in it over and over and over again because McCabe's family, his wife, received over $1 million through Terry McAuliffe and a PAC from the Clintons. We know that McCabe, through Lisa Page, leaked information about both of these things to make himself look good and to shift blame on these investigations to an unnamed person in the DOJ. This was investigated, this leak. This is an article that came out October 30th, 2016. Comey asked McCabe after this article came out. In the first week of November, Comey asked McCabe, how did this get out in the media? And McCabe pretended not to know how. He deceived Comey. Then later, months later, he was asked about it by inspection division agents who pulled McCabe into his office and said, hey, do you know anything about this leak? And McCabe was like, I don't know. Don't know how it happened. Really bad. It's a terrible thing. He was asked again about it. He was like, I don't know. Can't believe it. Then it got turned over to Inspector General Horowitz. And Horowitz and his investigators asked McCabe. McCabe's like, man, I don't know. Sure hope you find the guy. I just don't know. McCabe avoided signing a sworn statement for months, the entire summer of 2017. And then later on that year, Horowitz called him in for another sit down. And McCabe found out that IG Horowitz had the Page, Strzok, and McCabe text messages. And those revealed that McCabe unilaterally had authorized and instructed Lisa Page to leak to Devlin Barrett of the Wall Street Journal the information that's in this article. And IG Horowitz reports exposed at least 4 what he calls lack of candor, meaning lies and deceptions that McCabe made having to do with this specific article and the leaks into it. Now, Cruz is saying McCabe's in the media blaming Comey, saying that he was authorized to do this. Well, the indictment doesn't tell us where that was happening. Cruz doesn't tell us where that was happening. And this is probably news to Comey that this was occurring, because in the footnote here of this motion to dismiss, they can't find it either. They can't find it. Here, I'll show you right here. It's in one of the footnotes. Well, I missed it. Here, let me Control F. I'll find it real quick. Here we go. There is no record of Mr. McCabe ever stating that Mr. Comey authorized him to leak information to the Wall Street Journal, much less a repeated record of repeated and public statements to that effect. Mr. McCabe was interviewed multiple times, and in none of those interviews did Mr. McCabe assert that he spoke in advance with Mr. Comey about his disclosure to the Wall Street Journal. Rather, Mr. McCabe stated in his last interview that he informed Mr. Comey that he had leaked information after he had done so. And that's in the Inspector General report, which we have gone over in a video dedicated just to that just a month or two ago. Indeed, more than 2 years before this hearing, the Inspector General found that Mr. McCabe did not consult with Comey about talking to news outlets. This report. So as Cruz is sitting there asking the question, he's saying that Mr. McCabe is saying you authorized him. This is 2 years on from IG Horowitz determining that no, McCabe did it on his own and he was very wrong to have done it. That he was the source of the leak. So that's another problem with what Cruz is saying here.
Now, what Mr. McCabe is saying and what you testified to this committee cannot both be true. One,
after saying that repeating a false narrative or a fiction about what McCabe is saying in public and to media, Cruz then juxtaposes Comey's previous testimony and what McCabe is fictionally saying, and asks Mr. Comey the first question.
One or the other is false. Who's telling the truth?
That's the first question. Who is telling the truth? This fictitious story I made up about Deputy Director McCabe, or you and your prior testimony?
I can only speak to my testimony. I stand by what the testimony you summarized that I gave in May of 2017.
So you
How could Comey give any other answer to that? What other possible answer could he have given at this moment?
Your testimony is you've never authorized anyone to leak. And Mr. McCabe, if he says contrary, is not telling the truth. Is that correct?
Again, I'm not going to characterize Andy's testimony, but mine is the same today.
All right.
How is that a false statement? When you dig into the text of what Grassley was asking about and what Cruz was asking about, the colloquy here reflects that Cruz's questions focused exclusively on an asserted contradiction between Mr. McCabe and Mr. Comey. And since we can't find anything that McCabe said anywhere, and we already know, and Cruz knows, and Comey knows what the Inspector General found, at the time of Comey being asked about this, it already been shown that McCabe was the guy who leaked, and he did it through Lisa Page, and he lied to Comey about it. He lied to INSD agents about it, and he lied to IG investigators about it. It was only after IG Horowitz got the Lisa Page text messages that he came clean. Somewhat. But it's fundamental to any false statement charge that both the questions are clear and the answers are false. And neither of those things exist here. An answer to a fundamentally ambiguous question may not, as a matter of law, form the basis of a false statement charge. A question is fundamentally ambiguous if there are multiple ways to interpret it. And Senator Cruz's questions are fundamentally ambiguous. He quotes previous testimony. He makes a mistake when he does it. He then goes on to juxtapose Comey's testimony against fictional statements McCabe is making somewhere, and then ask Comey directly, who's telling the truth? Comey's answer isn't, I'm telling the truth, McCabe is lying, or vice versa. His answer is, I stand by my previous testimony. That's the only logical, reasonable answer he could possibly give in that moment, and it's not false. Cruz only asked two questions there. He asked that one I just said, and then he asked it again in a little bit of a different way, and Comey's response remains the same. Cruz did not stop and ask Mr. Comey whether his statement to Senator Grassley was true. He didn't ask about this. He recounted, with a mistake, Comey's testimony to Grassley. But he didn't ask Comey about this. He did not. And I think that's where a lot of folks get a little bit confused with the indictment and this whole false statement thing, is that because Cruz reads off the previous exchange with Grassley, people read into that the lie. Because obviously Comey is not lying when he says he stands by his previous testimony. That is not a lie. It's not false. Now, maybe you think Comey told a lie here in this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you for your opening statement. I'm going to start out probably with a couple subjects you wish I didn't bring up, and then a third one that I think
this is what people are thinking
everybody
of.
Needs to hear your opinion on.
When people say, Comey lied, we all know he lied, he definitely lied, he authorized Richmond to leak, they're thinking of this exchange, which the statute of limitations has run on.
Policy issue. It is frustrating when the FBI refuses to answer this committee's questions, but leaks relevant information to the media. In other words, they don't talk to us, but somebody talks to the media. Director Comey, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?
Never.
That's the first question. Have you ever been an anonymous source? He says never.
Question two on relatively related. Have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?
No.
Have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in regards to those two investigations? No. People think he's lying about that because we know that Daniel Richmond became a special government employee and that Comey gave information to him, and we know that Daniel Richmond was a source for some media articles, including ones that came up as in these leak investigations that happened starting in 2017, or some of them running all the way until 2021. But guess what? The article in which Daniel Richmond was a key source, he's named in. This article right here, which came out while Comey was FBI director, it's from April 22nd, 2017, and Daniel Richmond is a special government employee. Daniel Richmond is a named source, not anonymous. But I think what happens is because people think of this testimony and they think of articles like this, as well as others, they then inject those answers and that information into this question from Cruz, and they think the indictment makes sense, but it doesn't. It gets convoluted, and that's a big problem. That's a big problem for a false statement charge. As I read earlier, it has to be intelligible. It has to be clear, both the question and the answer. By structuring his questions in this way, Cruz raised two issues. But instead of asking Mr. Comey to address each issue separately, he only asked Mr. Comey to address the question of whether Mr. Comey or Mr. McCabe was telling the truth. Well, we already know that McCabe is a GD liar. We already know that. And Cruz knows it. And Comey knows it. Look right here. Lack of candor, lack of candor, lack of candor, lack of candor. This is about McCabe. So when Cruz says, who's telling the truth, you or McCabe? The answer is McCabe. But Comey can't say that. Can't, like, McCabe is a liar and you know it. Read the IG report. I wish he would have said that. I wish he would have said that. Instead, Comey said, I stand by my testimony. By structuring his comment and question that way, Cruz signaled to Comey that he should specifically address the question about whether McCabe was lying. What other interpretation could there be? But the indictment somehow says that Comey was lying about Daniel Richmond. It says Daniel Richmond is person 3, not McCabe. Again, this is the flaw I've pointed out in this indictment since it first came out. Each of Cruz's questions compounded two separate inquiries, whether Mr. Comey was telling the truth in 2017 and whether Mr. Comey had authorized McCabe to be an anonymous source. That's what I mean by getting convoluted, by people injecting this exchange into this exchange on top of the leaks that were in this article here. Cruz asked for a yes or no, or the equivalent of that, to the second inquiry. Cruz had confronted Comey with an inaccurate account of McCabe's statement, though. So that is another problem. And the best and perhaps only way for Comey to respond to Senator Cruz's compound and ambiguous question was to interpret it as being narrowly about McCabe, as that was the specific person that Cruz was bringing up and was directly asking Comey to address. He didn't ask about Daniel Richmond. Nobody ever brought up Daniel Richmond. And McCabe, when he says contrary, is not telling the truth. Is that correct? Well, a reasonable witness most readily would have understood Cruz to be asking him specifically to address whether he had authorized McCabe to serve as a source to the Wall Street Journal. And we know that is not true. They know that's not true. Cruz knows that. Comey knows that. All of those senators sitting there, the whole world knows it. As the indictment frames it, Cruz's question was whether Comey had authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source. But that quoted language is taken from a statement by Cruz that is a preface to the question that followed 4 seconds later. Context thus underscores that count one rests on a fundamentally ambiguous question, and therefore it has to be dismissed. Other problems that are this. As of May 3rd, 2017, when Grassley is asking Comey those questions, guys, there was no Trump investigation. There was none. Now, the media said there was. The media kept alluding to it. Media on the left and the right kept saying that the FBI was after Trump because Trump colluded with Russia. But it was false. There was no Trump investigation. And we've looked at some of Comey's memos, and what did they say? That he told Trump in person, you're not under investigation. There's an investigation into people associated with your campaign for their contacts with Russia. You are not under investigation. And he wasn't. But the media kept saying he was, because that put a black cloud over his administration and over him. And Trump wanted Comey to say publicly that he was not under investigation, but the FBI doesn't confirm or deny who's under investigation, just like they don't confirm or deny a grand jury's been used or what was before it. He's not going to say anything. He's not going to tell them. But these guys know. The guys in this Senate hearing, they know Trump's not really under investigation because they've been told so in private. But they can't leak that. They've been told so in the classified hearing. Comey also told the president that congressional leaders were aware that the FBI was not investigating the president personally. Please understand. My ex just jumped on me, and it's throwing me off a little bit. Thanks, X. Here we go. Jump down. All right. Folks, please understand that it is a media, Democrat, and GOP establishment lie that the FBI was investigating Trump. It's a lie that people still repeat and believe to this day, even though we have documentation that was not the case. Another problem is that Grassley had asked Comey about a leak concerning the Clinton investigation, meaning the email and foundation. And that is what McCabe had leaked about to the Wall Street Journal. Like I showed you, that is what McCabe leaked about. And the investigation into that leak started up 3 days after this hearing. So just logically, this is most easily interpreted to be a question from Cruz about McCabe. Again, another reason for Comey to respond in the way he did. Senator Cruz's use of the words never and ever injected additional ambiguity into it. And when Cruz referenced Senator Grassley's question about whether Mr. Comey had authorized someone else at the FBI to serve as an anonymous source, there was no reason to assume that he was referring to anyone but full-time employees like McCabe, who he kept mentioning and who the leaks had to do with, and who had been caught leaking the very, very information that Cruz referenced in the questioning. An investigation about the Clintons. And what does the indictment say? Person one, Hillary Clinton. Who leaked information about an investigation to the Wall Street Journal about Hillary Clinton? Andy McCabe, not Daniel Richman. So for all of this, like, this motion is very, very compelling because these fundamental flaws in this indictment. Both in the questions, they sink this indictment. But also Comey's answers are literally true. What he said was literally true. He stood by his statement. How can you interpret someone saying, I stand by my previous statement, as being false? Comey's answers were literally true. The senator posed 2 questions. Mr. Comey could only speak to his own testimony. He could not read Mr. McCabe's mind. And he didn't know whether McCabe intentionally lied in statements described by Senator Cruz. He hadn't seen them. This is all the more true where Senator Cruz cited statements McCabe hadn't made. So how could Comey have seen the statements Cruz was talking about? Likewise, Comey's statement that he stood by his prior testimony was truthful, regardless of whether that prior testimony itself was truthful. The statute of limitations on this is gone. Even if we assume Comey is a dirty cop, as Trump calls him, and that Comey lied in this hearing with Grassley, if we assume that Comey lied in this hearing about Grassley, Comey's statements in this hearing are still literally true because he stood by his previous testimony. He didn't change anything about it. How do you interpret that to be a false statement? He declined to respond directly to Cruz's second question and instead said, I'm not going to characterize what Andy said, but my testimony is the same today. That response is true. And Comey maintains that his prior testimony was truthful anyway. So for these reasons, in sum, although Mr. Comey did not respond directly to Cruz's questions, his responses were literally true. And Section 1001A2 does not criminalize non-responsive testimony. It criminalizes only false testimony. Mr. Comey's testimony here cannot plausibly be characterized as false. For these reasons, this indictment, Comey's attorney argues, has to be dismissed with prejudice. Now, my personal opinion, as you guys probably figured out, is that they're right. It should be dismissed. However, prosecution will get a chance to respond to this and say, no. Here's exactly what was false. Here's the questions he was responding to. Here's our interpretation of why this indictment is sound and why there is a false statements case against the defendant. They'll get to respond to this, and I will read that, and I will give it just as much of a chance as I've given this one from the defense. And in the next video, I'm going to go over this other filing from this case, which is a motion to seek disclosure of grand jury transcripts and audio recordings, because there are other problems with this indictment, some really big ones. And it's pretty clear from this paragraph right here, the one that brings in Daniel Richman as person 3, that some attorney-client privileged information leaked into the grand jury and resulted in this indictment. And that can't happen. That's a big no-no. So in the next video, that's what I'm going to go after. And then on my next full episode, Just Human number 351, we'll go over all the Comey updates. I'll see you there.